Good morning. As we get close to Rosh Hashanah, so we intensify our prayer and blessings for Semicha. We're in Ayin Beis, reviewing it second time around. We are on page 1401. As I said a number of times, the focus now is getting the bigger picture and also filling in the gaps, questions, themes the Rebbe Rasha not conclude, at least not explicitly. And based on the Maimorim that we learned over the months from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, we can put together a piece of the bigger picture. So we're in the middle of what is Riyah, Koyach HaRiyah, power, vision of eyesight in the spiritual level. Spiritual level is referring to the Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people, the eyes of the community, the eyes of the nation. Why they called eyes? Because they provide us with guidance and clarity. We'll soon learn based on Torah, of course. And that is why the Chachamim have played such an important role. So it's also an explanation on what leaders are, what a true leader is. A true leader shines light, like eyesight. Like he brought from the Zohar, that the body, the entire body, and all parts of the human being follow the eyes. The eyes go to the person. If you want to move from one place to another, you need the eyesight. The same thing in our work, in our serving, in our living our lives. The guiding light is in the Ha'eda. They're called the Chachamim, and explain that is why they were misakin the brachas. The brachas, because they established and put into place the brachas, because a bracha is exactly that. Its job is to be megala, to be mamshech and megala, to draw down and to reveal. And we learned through all the levels, essentially in the Kabbalistic terminology, to draw from Keser into Chochma, and from Chochma into Zun, into Malchus. So Malchus on its own would be concealed. And this is guiding light, drawing light, the Yichud that is accomplished through mitzvahs becomes revealed and manifest in the fullest possible way. The last thing we learned is that this bracha is the level of Yichud law. It's being mamshech Yichud law, a higher level of the divine unity into Yichud Tata, into Malchus, or like you call it Chochma to Chochma Tata. The level of a higher level of bittul, the level of bittul hayesh, as we reviewed and discussed yesterday. And the reason that the Chacham have this power is because they are Chachamim. They come from the level of Chochma, which is the level of Riyah. Then he added, then this is also why they're called Skenim. We speak about the 70 sages, the 70 Skenim. Remember before he said it's Sanhedrin. So who was the first 70 Skenim? The ones by Moshe Rabbeinu. Why are they called Skenim? Skenim Zesha Kona Chochma. So Zaken also refers to someone who acquired Chochma. Now what does that mean? He brought the story in Parsha Ba'alescha when Rabbeinu was asked by the Jews, they were complaining that they didn't have meat. They wanted to eat meat. So Moshe says to Hashem, Ayin Beis, where do I have meat from? What is Moshe saying? Moshe is a level of like Atzmis HaChochma or Chochma Stima, which is in Keser, Chochma within Keser. So he's removed from the needs of the people. He's not being in the state of a mashpia to go downward. Moshe is attached and connected to Hashem. Basar is something that needs to be a descent that's required to go down. That's what he says here. So that's what he said, Ma'ayin li basar. Just to read inside here the exact quote. Because of his great level, the high level he was on, he could not descend, he could not bring himself downward. It's like when a person is standing before their great teacher, they don't have the ability to go down now to teach to the students, especially Basar. And that's what Hashem says to him. Gather to the Osfa, the Siknei Yisrael, the 70s Canaan, And what is that level? That's the level of Moichin Shebemidus. They are relating more to the people. They're like the teachers of the people. The Ein Eda, like we said. However, initially their level in mid to midus. So in Ruchnius, Moshe is like etzem HaChochma, or Chochmas Tema, that is looking upward and connected upward. The Skenim, their role is to engage with the people. They're like the teachers of the people. Moichin Shebemidus. And what changed? Because of this, Hashem said, Vatsalti, Maitzil, meaning that which is a level higher than Moshe Rabbeinu. Even though initially he says Moshe and the Skenim is like the Maitzil and the Solid, but he breaks it down further. Vatsalti, the Abraham says that I will impart from your Chochma, your Etzem HaChochma Keser of Moshe, to the Skenim. So now, the Hamshach is coming from Atzmis HaChochma, Oi, Gam came B'chinas, Oi, Gam B'chinas Chochmas Ta'ah. He'll soon explain why it has to come from Moshe Dafke. But here now we see the interface becomes much stronger. And remember, the theme of Ayin Beis is interface. So now, from Moshe's higher level of Chochmah, that is Nimshach, is going down into the Chochmah Shebemidus of the Skenim, and they now elevate to a higher level because they're receiving from there. So similar to the idea of brachas that we spoke about before. Now, what is the idea of a bracha that brings mina elam ada elam, from alma disasya, that which is concealed, it brings into a revealed state. So this is a similar idea, obviously not exactly this exact, but similar, and that's why they're called skenim, like he said, because the skenim is 7 times 10. That is he said these are the Zayin Tachtenis, as the midis of the skenim, as they're being informed by Chochma Bina. That's the 70. And now they're getting that additional Hamshacha, that transmission from Moshe, and Hashem is facilitating that by Vatsalti, by emanating, by imparting from that energy from Moshe to the Skenim. That's where we're up to. So all this is coming to explain what the Einei Ha'eda are. So we see here that there's a level where they can guide, but there's a higher level where they're receiving the Riyah, like he said earlier, is receiving from the Etzem, Kayachariyah, Etzem HaChochma, like we learned earlier. Okay. Like we learned, you could have Ashpa, that in the form of Riyah, of seeing, or you could have it in a form of Staklus, and that's Negei Ba'atzmas, like he said before, Bonanus. You could have a contemplation that's more on the level of thought, theory, or it can become more tangible, where it's revealed, like he says in the point where you actually see, like as if you see it, the gili that's Negeil Atmos HaNefesh, that it pierces and reaches and permeates internally. And that's ultimately the goal. You have the highest, Hamshah, the highest levels of the divine coming down all the way to the lowest levels. This is the role that Moshe played and the Skenim play. But now we'll continue in the parentheses. We're going to explain this further. That is like this. This is we're on 2/3 down the page 1401, the line Bechinis Chochmas Tema. She says Kibchinis Meichin Shebemidus. Meichin Shebemidus, which is the intellect that applies to motions. So let me just elaborate a bit on that in case to refresh your memory. When we talk about Meichin and Midus, in general, besides the fact one is intellect and emotions, they also reflect two different types of transmissions. Moichin is primarily to yourself. When you're learning something, or you're using your mind, or you're conceiving of ideas, you're not necessarily communicating with anyone else. On the contrary, you can't be communicating, because when you're concentrating on an idea, any other person that comes over to you, let's say your student, or anyone, is going to be mavabel you. They'll just confuse you. So Moichin is fundamentally is an energy flow for sure, because it's a conscious process of cognitive process, but it's a process that's primarily to yourself. Midays, by definition, is relationship oriented. Chesed, kindness. So even though you may not have someone to bestow kindness, but you are feeling the need to give kindness. Kindness relates to others. Same thing with Gvura. Same thing with Teferes. All the midas. So in the context of the divine, Moichin is more of a lakus that's so-called above the worlds, and midas is already God relating to the worlds. That's a general structure. Now, of course, there's midas, there's midas Moichin and Moichin midas, because they're not completely two separate worlds. When you contemplate on something and you come up with an idea, then you say, okay, here are my conclusions. Here how this will inform the midas. We learned this somewhat similar to when we talked about Mishnah. So we spoke about the Mishnah the six sections of Mishnahs, Shas, Shisha, Sidre Mishnah, the six midas, Chagas of Yetzirah. So that was the idea. Mishnah takes the Mikra and brings it down to halachas that are chesed, kosher, not kosher, mutter, permitted, not permitted, ister and heter. So it brings it down into midas. So midas is already a structural, a structure that is informed by moichin. So when, for example, you go to a rabbi and ask him a question, so he needs to research it. That's the moichin part. And then he comes back to you and says, based on my research, here are my conclusions. And those are the midas. So it begins with midas sheba moichin. Then there's moichin sheba midas. That even when you start implementing them into chesed, it's being formed by moichin. So now when we talk about Moshe Rabbeinu is moichin be'etzem. He's Har Sinai with Hashem. Obviously, he's the leader of the people and ultimately gives direction. But we know it went through Aaron, it went through Kisres, delegated. Not everyone went straight to Moshe. So everything originates from Moshe, but then Moshe passes it on, and the Zikanim play the role of the so-called more relatable teachers, if you wish, the ones that are really involved and more engaged with the people. So they are the meichin of the midas, because they are the guiding light. So in a sense, they already have a certain guiding element. But the real power of Riyah, and we know Riyah is connected to Chochma, especially Etzema Chochma, comes from Moshe. So the Tzalti Min HaRuach is a stage where these Chachamim become Einei HaEda, that they're now accessing the Etzem Koyach HaRiyah, that Tzalti, that Hashem emanates or imparts from Moshe to the Skenim, and now they can give them the hashpahs that they need coming from these highest levels. Like he says now, so reading now inside, so he says like this, even though Meichus Midas also originates in Chochma. But the Chochma, it's more the behavioral science. It's more the cognitive that is guiding the behavioral of Midas. But being Moichin in Midas, not Moichin be'etzem on its own, so you don't have the full intensity of the power of Moichin like we learned before about Moshe, but it's ha'ara levad, the eina reich legab b'chinas atzmus ha'chochma. And it's relatively distant or infinitely distant, you can say, not infinitely, eina reich, a leap from atzmus, the core chochma. Okay, so therefore, that's why the skenim on their own, or before they get this atzilus, v'atzalti min haruach, the imparting of the spirit of Moshe upon them, are still on a lower level, even though they are still leaders. Moichin sheba midas. V'yadua, on the other hand, it's known, hashpah tzarich is oz mebchinas Moshe. Hashpah in general has to come from Moshe. Moshe is the leader of the generation. He's the one that Hashem chose. The Torah comes to him. So even though it's filtered, so to speak, or channeled, it may be better through the Skenim, but the original has to come from Moshe. That's why the Yidden came to Moshe, and Moshe said, Ma'ayin li basar. Because ultimately, all hashpahs have to come from Ein Sof, not just from Sheba Midas. So that's why it says, Vatsalti, Al-Kain Vatsalti. That's why Hashem says, Vatsalti. I will take from Moshe's deeper level of Etzem HaChochma, all the hashpahs come from Chochma, all the way rooted in Keser, and impart that upon the Skenim. So that's the process. The parenthesis just adds that, which tells me that the lines before may be from a source Maimer. I have to find where that is. The Rebbe Rashab now is going to explain it with an example of something we learned earlier. And I'll just explain, then I'll read inside. Remember about Semicha ish mepi ish. that from Moshe is passed on man to man, teacher to student, mouth to mouth, all the way to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, where they had the clarity in the Mishnah that was clarity without it being diluted, all as it was by Moshe. So we learned earlier on page 1377 the concept of Semicha, where it says when Moshe Hashem, then now you point Yeshua, your successor. So it says v'samach Moshe yadav al Yeshua. He placed his hands on Yeshua, and with that he was mamshech to him that power of leadership, which is he's going to now compare that Yeshlema, that this is similar to that Silus from Moshe to the Skenim. Obviously not exactly, because Yeshua is the leader after Moshe's passing, but similar. So he says like this, Yeshlemer, Shazeu ke'inyan hasmicha. Now smicha literally means placing. Smicha also means closeness, but smicha means the essentially when we ordain someone, we call it smicha. So smicha means that the teacher is so-called ordaining and passing on to the student a certain part of his authority, and he in turn received it from his teachers. So he says this is like ke'inyan hasmicha. Shazeu amshachas b'chinas ha'chochma. What does smicha accomplish? It's amshachah. The student, the success, like in the case of whoever's receiving the smicha on their own, they're already a chochma. But it's lower level of chochma. Smicha adds hamshach of chochma. And as I said, we go back to 1377, spoke about it there, more detail. Yeah. We talk about Moshe passing on the smicha. There he talks about Moshe and Yeshua. Compares that to the Tanoim. Like it says elsewhere, the smicha smuchim ish mepi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu Shalom. When we speak about smicha, smicha does not stop. It's an unbroken chain. Student was received from teacher, the teacher from his teacher, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So every Rav that has smicha today is a smicha that comes from a Rav that received it from a Rav all the way in an unbroken chain line straight to Moshe. That's why you see in Pirkei Avos is such an emphasis. Moshe kibbutz Torah Sinai u'masara Yeshua, Yeshua l'skenim, skenim l'nevim, nevim l'anshei knesset hagdela. And you have the next Mishnayos, all of them talk about the continuing lineage, what we call the Masera, as is passed on, change the generation to generation. The Rashab is explained, but isn't it a fact that even without smicha, the Chacham did not receive this ordination? They also come to the level of Chochma. That's why they're called Chacham. So that's how he explains it based on what we're learning here. The Zkenim were Chacham before Vatzalti min Haruach. Just like they're Chacham before Smicha, that's why they're worthy of ordination, because they have studied and learned and they became sages. But what Smicha does is Atzmis HaChachma. Not just a Chachma, how to relate to Midas, guide the people, but from the very core, which ultimately originates from the Ein Sof itself, from Keser and Atik and so on. Like the Bachai, Rabbeinu Bachai al Posik, Sochlas Yodov. So on the Posik where it says that you should take your hands, and the Smicha, so the Eibush is telling him how to do it. So he says, "Sheniskaven be'esadatz bois." That his intention with the 10 fingers. When you make smicha, you're taking both hands, which includes the 5 fingers one hand and the 5 fingers of the 10 as bois. So sheniskaven be'esadatz bois yodov lahachich b'mokar hasech. That's what the Bechaya says. What are you doing? You're drawing from the source of seichel. You're being mamshechet through your hands to the kabul, to the student. And he compares it to Birchas Koyanim. By the Koyanim, that's what they do. They take their hands and they apart them and they bless the people. Why hands? Because the hands is like the transmission. Raise your arms, Kodesh, to Kodesh or the holy arm, and bless. Kodesh Shuya Chochma. That's the word Chochma, is the level of Chochma. Shumokan HaBrocha. That's the source of blessing. So you see here also the relationship to what we learned in the previous page about brachas. He said that's what a bracha is. A bracha reaches the source, like he said from Zohar. Moker HaChayim, Moker D'Chayim. From there it draws it into Chochma, Chochma to the level, Zohar, Malchus, Ad Kan L'Shene. So this is actually word for word from the Bachai. What Semicha is. So it's exactly this idea. Something additional is happening that you're drawing from Atzmis HaChochma in the language of the Bachai, Moker Chochma. Ukamoy be Yeshua, like by Yeshua, by Joshua, the Ksiv Yeshua Ruach Chochma. Yeshua is filled with the spirit of wisdom. Ki samach Moshe yodav alav. Because Moshe samach placed his hands upon him and ordained him. I am Masha Kol Zeh B'Zoyar Vayakel Dafrish Ezvov Seif Amid Aleph. Tell us to look in Zoyar in Vayakel, volume 2, that's page 215, the bottom of the first page there. Yeshua b'chinas malchus. Yeshua on his own is the level of malchus. Umaleru achachma b'chinas vav ksav is the zah. And when you say he's filled with the spirit of chachma, that's the vav ksav of zah, being nimshach and malchus, basically chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach. You say the 6 facets of zorampin. This that is moleru rach. Who are they smichas meisha? And all this is through smichas meisha. Ki ma chachma nimshach lezah. From Chochma is transmitted into Zah, Umizah leMalchus, and from Zah to Malchus. Because remember, Malchus is the end process. If the Midas are the relationship with others, Chochma is and Meichen is the relationship with yourself, Malchus is the final product, so to speak, like the moon that ultimately shines into Biyah. So basically, that's what the Zohar says. The Zel Gamkein Inyan Atzilus Ruche Shal Meisha Alaskenim. And this is also the inyan of the emanation or the parting from the spirit of Atzilus is going back to the Skenim. Al Askenim over this on the sages. The Amshachah from the Chochma of Moshe called Atzmis HaChochma. And with that, he includes the parentheses explaining this process. And now he's going to go back to ultimately tie it all up together, and come back to Einei Ha'eda. Called the eyes of the people, the eyes providing that clarity. But you see here, if you think about it, 2 levels. There's the Chachamim on their own already vision, but it's more the vision of how our idea is within the vessel of the eye. So it's limited. And then is reaching Koyach Etzem Koyach Hariyah. We talk about reaching the source, where there's no limitation. You can see even in the dark. He's not saying that explicitly here, but you see also 2 levels in the Chochma of the Skenim. And we'll soon see how he ties it together. But let me stop here, then the parentheses, if anybody wants to ask anything. Clarify anything.
Audio seems awful. I don't know if it's for me, but it's awful.
You're breaking up. It's hard to hear you.
You're breaking up. You've been doing it at least from here. Maybe other people aren't experiencing it.
Am I being heard clearly by everybody?
You're mostly clear. There have been a few moments where it's been a little checkered, but Spee, we can barely hear you at all.
Everybody sounds rough here.
It sounds like your internet connection may not be good, or check the wires, because you're usually very clear. Yeah. Maybe sign off and sign back on, Spee.
We'll try.
Can't hear a word you're saying, Spee. Not a word. He just left. I would continue, Rabbi.
Okay. Anybody wants to ask anything or continue inside?
I'd say continue. I can hear Isaac clear as a bell, and like he said, you're a little checkered off and on, but for the most part, it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, let's continue. The connection here should be good at this point, but okay, hopefully. Okay, so now we continue. We're at 6 lines at the bottom of page 1401. I'm sorry, Uliyah. I was going back. So being that this is a transmission from the Torah of Chochma, not just from the Ha'ara of Chochma as it radiates or illuminates the Midas, Al-Kain Nikla Shekona Chochma. I was going back to the original point. That's why Shekona Chochma. So the Skenim, the Chochma, and there's a level of Shekona Chochma that they acquire Chochma. So he's comparing that to like after the Vatsalti. He says, tells to look at this apostle Maimer, I think in Torah and Mishpatim. The word sikna, kinyan, has a particular power. When you krena something, even halachically, means you've acquired it, becomes yours. You own it. Whereas before that, you can still rent it, you could still borrow it, you could still in some way access it. But Kana Chachma is a whole level called. So even though they were called skenim before the Vatsalti, clearly emphasizing that the Atzmas HaChochma really turned it into the level, because the pasuk says Osfali skenim, gather the skenim, and they're called skenim before the imparting of Vatsalti. So you have to say that there are two levels in that. So this is skenim shekona chachma, ubezer ba'alescha daf kuf nuvav amar aleph. And in Zeir Baleska, page 156a, the Vatsalti min haruach, he's now comparing it to Zehu, is similar to Kedimian, similar to Halavona, the moon, Shemekabeles ha'er ma'ashemesh, the moon receiving the light from the sun, with Moshe being the sun, and the Skenim being like moon. K'moy kein Ruach HaKodesh, so too the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, that the Ayin Skenim, whom Mebchinas Sira, their Ruach HaKodesh comes from the level of the moon, Sira Malchus, Moshe Mebchinas Shimsha and Sira, from the level of the sun. We know Pnei Moshe Pnei Chama. V'zeu v'asalti min haruach shalecha, and this is the meaning of the verse. V'asalti, Hashem says, V'asalti, and I imparted from your spirit, from the Ruach of Moshe, upon you, upon Moshe, to the Skenim, Shalafi Shehem Mebchinas Sira, being that the sages are from the level of the moon. Al Kain Hem Sichim L'Kabla Mebchinas Shemesh. That's why Vatzal, they need to receive the light from the sun. Shazeu B'chinas Moshe, the sun being the level of Moshe. So what do we see from this Zohar? Similar idea. I'll soon explain. Because seemingly, 1 second, he's talking about the eyesight. It's only talking about the moon. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let me just finish the whole point here. V'hainu, this means Gamkein Kanal. So we see from this, similar to what we said before. The Amshachim Mebchinas Chochma L'Zah Umimenu L'Malchus. The Amshachim is from Chochma, from Moshe to Zah, which is the Sanhedrin, to all the way to Malchus, which is the level of Sira, the moon. V'yesh lemer, I'll just to the end of the paragraph, next page, turning the page to 1402. V'yesh lemer, you can say, Shezeu al derech, zeh hadover. So it says in the pasuk, zeh hadover, this is the thing, zeh hadover. Shadibur de b'chinas malchus. Dibur, we know, the speech is the level of malchus. Shehu b'chinas koi. So there's koi and zeh. As we discussed a number of times, koi means like. Zeh means I'm seeing it. When you say zeh hadover, this is it. It's like you're pointing at it. It's right in front of you, revealed. When you say koi omar Hashem or koi or kemoi, it's koi, like it's like. So it's like the likeness of, similar to. So koi is the level of malchus on its own. The lower level of yichud, but that it should become, when you say zeh hadover, you're saying this dover, this dibur of should become zeh. So he's bringing back the idea of Yichud law being transmitted into Yichud Tata. So it adds another point in revealing within Malchus its own, it's a lower level, and you bring Mamshir Zeh from the higher level of Zeh again is like I'm seeing it with my own eyes, not just being told about it, like that it's similar to Vizeh. And this is, now he's tying all this up, saying Vizeh, and this is what we've been discussing. Shasanhedrin Heime Inei Ha'eda. That the Sanhedrin, which are these Kenim, the Sanhedrin, the members of the court, the judges, Heime Inei Ha'eda, they're the eyes of the people, the eyes of the nation, of the community. Lies, Shehein Smuchim Ish Mipi Ish Ad Moshe Rabbeinu Olav HaShalom, meaning that they're ordained, and they receive the Chochma from generation to generation, all the way to Moshe. Means that within them is the Amshachas HaChochma. That's why Chochma is really called Einei Eda, and they have the power to establish blessings. Al-Kaim B'Yachtem. That's why they have the power, the capacity, Lahamshich Eda Chochma B'Neshamas Yisrael, to be mamshich, to transmit the light and clarity of Chochma into the souls of Israel. Which means that the gili of the higher level of Chochma into the lower level of Chochma, and that gili should come down lamata all the way below, as we are below, even not just Chochma Lo to Chochma Tata, but from Malchus all the way down to Biyah, to the lower levels. So that's a fuller explanation of Einei Ha'eda, with the whole details from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and we get the whole bigger picture of what these people are. Their level of Einei Ha'eda, which goes back to the level of Ayin. Let me just say one more thing before I take any questions. The fact that he brings the moon here, even though it's applicable, because the moon receiving from the sun is similar to the Chacham, the Zkenim receiving from Moshe. No problem. But what it tells you also is that though he's moved away from the moon, the example of moonlight, which was more Malchus of Bria, Talmud, and the luminous stone, the second level of Er Makabel, in Malchus of Yetzirah, and now he's talking about Malchus of Asiyah, the eyesight, but it's very clear from this, at least in my understanding, that the other two are not completely irrelevant. Remember, they're all three levels in Malchus. And as we discussed, there are three levels of growing and acclimating the Makabel to be able to receive from the Mashpia and ultimately become like the Mashpia. Eir HaRiyah does it in the fullest sense of the word because the eye itself sees. But that doesn't mean there's no element of moonlight and sunlight in this whole picture as well. I just want to put that in as to the discussion, the fact that he quotes that here. So overall, the general picture is very clear. It's a general picture of Makabel and Mashpia. But even this aspect of Malchus, that Malchus has three levels in it, but the moonlight and the luminous stone and ultimately eyesight are really connected. And we'll talk about this as well as we go further when we talk about Torah. Ultimately, remember, Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud are all three levels in Torah. They all come to illuminate. They're just different roles. And ultimately, Eir HaRiyah is like the real place where it plays itself out, that we ourselves are able to see godliness. So initially it begins with the siyua, the support of an outside light, as we shall learn. But ultimately the eye itself sees, and to the point that it will be able to see even without an outside light, as we'll discuss later. So that is, and that also makes another connection. Earlier on in Ayin Beis, here in volume 3, he spoke about how the Levana today receives from the sun, then the elevation of Malchus and the moon, to the point that the moon will come like the sun, to the point that the moon is mashpia into the sun. So that's also going to be connected to all of this, as we'll discuss later. Just wanted to tie it all together. So I'll stop right now here for questions or any points that need to be clarified. Top of page 1402 at the end of the paragraph. I mean, we'll learn more, but I just want to stop if anybody wants to weigh in here. Okay.
I may have been a little distracted, so forgive me if you said this, but I didn't pick up or understand how the other two types of Or Makabel play into this. discussion of Ene Haeda. I get the part about the moon. That's very clear, but I don't understand the other two, Mushalim, and how they relate to this sugya.
I didn't really elaborate. I just said they're connected because they're all Makabel, they're all Malchus. It's how the Makabel receives light. Because the moon, the luminous stone, and the eyesight all are ultimately, initially, Makabel. It's just that the eye is the ultimate experience because the eye itself sees, and the eye is fundamentally not a Makabel. But the point is that they're all, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud are all three levels in Torah in how Torah illuminates us. So Ein Ha'eda, even though primarily they're eyes, but they're also an element of the moonlight within them and also of the luminous stone. So he doesn't discuss it in detail. I was just saying that it's connected. It's three separate discussions entirely. They're all part of one bigger picture.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Any points? So now we're going to come back to remember that this all has to still explain, which we're going to explain the next few pages, how this works exactly. Because on one hand, the eye itself sees. On the other hand, it needs a siyua, the support of an outside light to shine. So now we've established that the leaders are the ones that provide that. But remember, it's ultimately all connected to Torah. That's the theme that began on page 1350. So now we're going to say exactly that this clarity that the Ein Ha'eda have comes from Torah, and they are mamshich that Torah into Neshamas Yisrael to provide them clarity and guidance and direction. But ultimately, Neshamas Yisrael can reach and will reach a higher level even than Torah. The eye itself will see when it reaches Etzem Koyach Hariyah. So right now, we have to receive, like we're receiving from this game, just like they received from Moshe, Atmis HaChochma. But ultimately, the eye itself will see. So this is going to be now the transition. But first, it's going to cover the idea of Torah, how Torah comes into all of this. So he says,
I'm sorry. You said something that was not clear. Or Hariyah is an Or Makabel. That was one of the three we discussed, isn't it?
And then he said, if you look at the bottom of page 1398, he said that's only as Riyah is inside the eye. But Etzem Koyach Hariyah ain't a b'chinas er Makabel. The last line on page 1398. There's the whole thing. There's two levels in Riyah. There's the Riyah as we see, and we need an outside light. But the Etzem Koyach Hariyah in the Nefesh doesn't have that limitation. But we can
Thank you.
So
understood.
You can say it's similar to the Atzmis HaChochma that Moshe is mamshich, that this game need Moshe. But we'll see how this plays itself out as he discusses it further. So he's going to say now, but bottom line is that the light of the eye of the leaders, Ein Ha'eda, they are the eyes of the people. So he says, now this transmission that we're talking about, from Chochma Elah to Chochma Tata, that's through Torah. She's quoting the Siddur again, just for the record. The Siddur is the Siddur that the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe composed and published, which is his Maimorim as he heard them from the Alter Rebbe, but he gathered together the Maimorim all in the order of the prayers. So quite a few Maimorim of the Siddur were quoted. I should mention, you asked me about Mizmer L'Seder, that's also Siddur.
Thank you.
So he says like this. So in the Siddur there's a Maimer that begins that the Rabbanim said in Gemara. How does we know Birchas HaMazon from the Torah? That's the name of the Maimer. And another source. He's referred to this Maimer quite a few times before. The Maimer in Ekev, Achalta, in Likutei Torah. What does it say there? So in those Maimorim, he explains the fact that we need to mention, the question is, why Birchas Hamazon, where you're giving the grace after the meals, and you're thanking God for sustaining and feeding us, why do we mention bris and Torah? Bris is the covenant, and Torah, you're not talking about bris and Torah, you're talking about mazon, about food. You're eating, it's a blessing after the food. Why are you mentioning bris and Torah? Lies, the reason is, because Hamazon who Amshachim b'chinas Chochma law. Because Birchas Hamazon, like a bracha, like we said before, bracha is what? Is Amshachim from Chochma law. Shazel Birchas Hazon, b'chinas Haman. So the first blessing we know was said even when they ate the man, Hashemayim. Hazon Sakel, the first blessing in the Birchas Hamazon, which is the level of the man. Shehim Shech Moshe, and who threw down the man? That was Moshe Rabbeinu. It's called the food of Chochma. And Moshe was the level of Chochma, was the one. The of Moshe, the man came on. The schus of Miriam was the water. The schus of Aaron was the Anani Akod, the clouds. The schus of Moshe was the man. Moshe drove down the man, so that's the level of Chochma. So we see from that Birchas Hamazon, especially the first blessing, is the level of being Mamshech Chochma law. B'Chochma Tata. It's Amshacha, that's Birchas Hamazon. Yeah, the bracha is being mamshech from the higher level of Chochma law into Chochma Tata below, into the food that we eat. Hine Amshacha zu idea Torah. This Amshacha is through Torah. That's what it says in the Maimorim there. That's why we mentioned Torah. He talks also about bris, how it's connected to bris, but right now the focus is on Torah here. So because Torah is ultimately the ultimate Chochma of Hashem, that allows us to draw down from that higher level to the lower level. So it's not just a blessing on the food that we ate, it's also being mamshech into it from the Chochmei law, and that is through Torah. Okay, so now he's going to explain two different ways how this works. B'shtei ponim. B'shtei ponim is an expression in Hebrew, two different manners or two different ways or two different approaches to this. Oy mishum, one approach, or is because Torah is Chabad zah. Torah is the level of Chabad of Midas of zah. That's one way to explain it. Remember, we said there's Kenim or Mechin of Midas. Similarly, Torah is Chabad of zah. Torah is not just abstract Torah. Is the Torah, like we talked about Mishnah, that is a Chabad that tells us how to live our lives. So it's a Chochma that's relating to existence. If the Torah was only speaking about godliness and higher levels, that you could say is Meichin Be'etzem. But the fact that Torah is a guide to life tells us it's Chabad of Zah. Therefore, it's a mamutza between Atzmus HaChochma, which is the level of Moshe, and Chochma Tata, the level of the Skenim, or the level of the people. So bottom line is, to be mamsheh from Chochma law to Chochma Tata through Torah, because Torah is Chochma of Zah. Chabad of Zah, I should say. That's one way to explain it. There's another way. In order to actually draw down from this higher level of Chochma into the lower level of Chochma, so is so you need some higher. What's compelling? Chochma Tata and Chochma Lo in general are two different levels. So how do you draw from one level to another where there's two levels? So you need something from a higher place that pushes. It's like in general, when someone wants to go down lower, you have to go deeper. So you go to the Sheidish Hamshach of Madregal Yeser or Commission is boiled ill, like we learned earlier. Remember, it's through the gazing of Arachampin, Keser, looking upon the Netzalim, the emanations of Tzilis. Or he also said the way the emanations look at Arachampin. Istaklusa Arachampin sounds, it can combine both. So therefore, that's what draws down a higher Amshacha. And that's why you need Torah. Because Torah originates from the Chochma Geduma, from the primordial wisdom of Ein Sof. Like it says, Torah was for him a nursling. Hashem nursed Torah. That's what the pasuk says. It means long before existence, meaning long before, not in time and concept. Torah was like intimately with the king inner chambers, and it was that God nursed it. Basically, it's like his protege wish. Maybe not the right word to use, but the idea. So Torah therefore has two levels. He's saying there's Torah Chabad. That's already Torah as is coming down to be a guiding light, a guiding blueprint for life. So that's the first explanation. That's why the Shach from Chochma law needs to go through the interface of Torah into Chochma Tata, into Malchus. The second explanation is because in order to have that Amshach, you have to go all the way to the source. And Torah is originating in the source, all the way up in the source, and therefore it's through Torah that Chochma law goes into Chochma Tata. Now, obviously, this is not contradictory. It's two explanations, and many ways you could even say it's interdependent, but he doesn't say that explicitly. Bottom line is he's just explaining how this Amshacha takes place. So you see how Torah plays a critical role here. Imagine a Sanhedrin or Eini Ha'eda that don't have Torah, or even Moshe without Torah. There could be great people, but it's the Torah that really is the Torah that is, first of all, integrated within them, and it's through that Torah that they're mamshech these Amshachas, whether it's Eini Ha'eda to the people through Torah, or Moshe to the Skenim, or Hashem to the Eini Ha'eda, all through Torah. That's the way, the Eini Ha'eda, the way the light, the Hamshach of Chochma to Chochma Tata takes place. Okay. So continuing on, let's, well, maybe I shouldn't continue on. I'll stop here. You know what? Let's stop here. Now more into what Torah does, which of course is the central theme of the second form of interface, how Torah illuminates us. So this is directly connected to the whole piece of Torah. So very good. Yeah, that's connecting. That's why Hariyah Torah. And keep in mind that we began this topic on page 1350, 1352, I should say. He said that Torah is etzema Eir. And Ner Mitzvah is still a lower level. Eir Torah, he says, is Atzmus Eir, so Eir Atzmi. Yeah, that's going to be very relevant because that's what Torah is different than Tefillah. Lamata Lamayla, you don't get the Eir Atzmi quite. Well, you do because you're going all the way down below, so you get the Helama Atzmi. But through Torah, you actually get the Eir Atzmi, and the goal is that obviously it should be internalized and integrated into our eyes, that our very eyes should see it. Okay, we're going to see how that develops as we go along. Bottom line is directly connected to the theme of how Torah serves as an interface of bringing the divine into our lives. Right now, the Torah is illuminating us like a light that illuminates the eye in the dark. And it's through the Eini Ha'eda leaders. And then we're going to learn how the neshamas, as they assimilate and internalize Torah, the eye becomes more refined and the eye itself will be able to see. And that's when the neshamas become higher and are mashpia into Torah. That's, again, the next page. But meanwhile, right now, he's still explaining how Torah is the interface between the higher and the lower. We'll stop here. And it's up to you guys that we have a class tomorrow, Rosh Hashanah, unless people can't make it.
Can't make it.
It's up to you.
Tzvi, what did you say? You can or cannot, Tzvi?
I definitely can't. It's so much to do. It's incredible.
Okay, it's up to everyone here, whatever you guys decide.
Please do. Please do. We see the miracles. We have to support all of these changes.
So what's the consensus here?
I'll be here.
This is Mrs. Schneider says yes. I'm with Meira, so that's 4-1.
Okay, so fine, we'll do it. It's recorded. Anyone could hear it afterwards, like anything lost. And so we will have a class tomorrow, and then we'll resume on Sunday after the 3 days.
Can you take a question before you end the class?
No, we could take. Anyway, so I just want to say. Let me just say where I'm stopping here. So I'm stopping here on third way down page 1402. But we'll continue recording. Go ahead.
I did not understand the how there's some reference to Torah in the first paragraph of Birchas Hamazon. The second paragraph, we thank God for Torah, but I didn't. You said I think he was talking about the first paragraph of Birchas Hamazon, and I didn't understand the connection to Torah.
Well, it says Birchas Hamazon in general is the Amshachah from Chachmila to Chachmetata, and the parentheses he adds to explain that. He says that's why the first blessing in the Birchas Hamazon we know was said even when they ate man lechem min hashamayim. The second blessing is lechem min haaretz, but the first blessing in benching, which we say, is man, and he says the man is the level of Torah. The man is himshech Moshe mezuna de Chochma.
Is there a connection?
He doesn't say explicitly it's the level of Torah. He says is the level of mezuna of Chochma. Lechem min hashamayim is a higher hamshach, obviously. Lechem min haaretz is like malchus. Lechem min hashamayim is Chochma. So he's giving additional support for that we're mamshech min law. That's why we say Birchas Hamazon.
Is there an inference that Torah is food for the soul?
That's in general, regardless, not from this.
Okay, no, I mean just from this particular discussion.
Not you could say.
I'm sorry, you broke up. Can't hear your answer.
My answer is not necessarily connected to this. That's in general true. Torah is food of the soul.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? So we'll stop here. I'll continue tomorrow. So top 2.